Perceptual processes. In Unit 5, we have learned the process of a sensation and the process of attention. Now we will learn the process of perception. Consider an elephant. What is the first part of that elephant that comes to your mind? It may be the tusk, the trunk, or maybe the ears. It is all about how you perceive the elephant. Perception refers to our sensory experience of the world. We know that we have sense organ, we have studied that, and how we experience the world. That is the perception. It is through this experience that we gain information about the environment around us. Before going to the details, as always, please remember to subscribe this channel. Thank you. What is perception? It is the process by which one screens, selects, organizes, and interprets stimuli to give them meaning. We all know that our environment contains n number of stimulus. From that, we need to select, then we need to organize, and then we will interpret these stimuli. For what? To give them meaning. So, the perception is a process of making sense out of the environment in order to make an appropriate behavioral response. An individual's perception of a given situation, it is not a photographic representation of the physical world. It is a partial personal construction in which certain objects selected by the individual for a major role are perceived in an individual manner. That is, perception is subjective, it is active and creative process through which we assign meaning to the sensory information to understand ourselves and the others. So, stimuli as it is doesn't contain any meaning. We need to interpret it to give meaning to them, and it differs from one person to another. Another person looking at the same elephant might see it as a completely different way than you do. So the perception differs from one person to another. That is, the perception is unique to each person, with no two people perceiving exactly the same or perceiving 100% of all the things all the time. That is, two persons perceive same thing in different way. The perception is unique to each person. The perception process, it happens thousands of times a day without being conscious of it. It includes 5 senses: the touch, sight, sound, smell, and taste. Now let's see what are the 3 stages of the perception: selection, organization, and interpretation. In selection, it is the first stage. We choose the stimuli that attract our attention. We focus on one that stand out to our senses. That is, our senses are sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. So we focus on to the one which stand out. So this is the first stage of our perception. It involves decision making about what need to be attended to, what can be unconscious sometimes, and on the other occasions it can be intentional. So the selection, sometimes it can be unconscious and sometimes it can be intentional. So that is the first stage of perception. The world around us might present infinite stimuli, but our brain has the capacity to attend to the stimuli selectively, which depends upon the environmental factors and the individual factors. So the first is selection. Then comes organization. Once the stimulus is selectively chosen or it is selected, the second stage comes into play. In this stage, that is in the organization stage, a series of reactions set in the brain. In this stage, we tend to mentally organize the stimulus into meaningful patterns for being able to interpret the same properly. So, the stimulus, first we select it, then we organize it to give a meaningful pattern so that we will be able to interpret it properly. Then comes the interpretation stage. The interpretation of the information takes place for providing some meaning to the stimulus to which we are exposed. So first selection, then we organize the stimuli and then we will interpret the stimulus. We tend to categorize the stimulus for being able to acquire a proper understanding and take improved decision accordingly. So through the interpretation, we will get a better understanding and we can act or we can decide accordingly. Interpretation is subjective because different people might perceive the same stimuli in different way. And the past experience, their attitude, the values or beliefs, etc. can influence the way people perceive. So these are the three stages of perception. Now the types of perception. They are often separated by different senses. For example, it includes the visual perception, the auditory perception, the smell, the touch, and the taste perception. We perceive our environment using each of these, often simultaneously. Then there are also different types of perception in psychology. It includes the person perception. It refers to the ability to identify and use social cues about people and relationship. So that is a perception in relation with the person. Then comes social perception. It is how we perceive certain societies and can be affected by things such as stereotypes. So that is the social perception. Then another type of perception is selective perception. This involves paying attention to some part of our environment while ignoring others. So we perceive things selectively. So these are the types of perception. Now let's have a quick recap on what we have learned. We have learned the perception. In perception, what happens? We have various stimulus in our environment. It is attended by or it is selected and sensed by our sense organ. Then what happens? From this sense organ, it is moved into our brain or passed on to the brain as neural impulses. Here in the brain, the processing happens, and this processing which happens in our brain is known as the perception. And we have learned certain stages of perception and the types of perception. More about the perception will be coming in the upcoming videos. The perception, it refers to the way the sensory information is organized, interpreted and consciously experienced. For understanding the human behavior, it is very important to understand the perception. How the people perceive in different situations. Hope you like this video. Please like, share and subscribe. Thank you and keep smiling.